welcome back to yet another episode of Early Childhood Chats, the podcast. We are in season 2, and so happy that you're joining us. And today I am super excited. This is something a little bit different than we've done before. We're joined by Jackie Mader of the Hetchinger Report, and we're going to be talking about early childhood from a little bit of a different perspective. Jackie is a journalist and has written a whole myriad of articles on early childhood, working with parents, talking about their struggles, talking with educators on their struggles. And I'm just, really excited to kind of get that perspective. And in addition, Jackie knows what she's doing because she's also the proud mom of 2 young boys. So you've got that going for you as well.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Andy. As you said, I cover early childhood education. I've been focused solely on early childhood for about 9 years. I started right around when I was pregnant with my oldest son. And yeah, I've covered K-12, higher ed, teacher prep, and early ed. And early ed is just that sweet spot for me. I love covering this topic. Living this topic while covering it has been just amazing and challenging all at the same time.
Well, I really appreciate your kind of unique voice in the field and talking about these issues from a little bit of a different lens. And I'm kind of curious, what kind of drew your focus on wanting to report on the early childhood field? Was there a particular story or moment or something that kind of sparked your interest, or was it like you were living it literally as a mom and you thought this deserves some more attention?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I used to be based in Mississippi and I was covering K-12 in Mississippi. And Mississippi started to introduce legislation for state-funded pre-K. This was over a decade ago. And so I started kind of following the pre-K conversation and learning more about early ed. I had taught middle school, so I saw some of the consequences of kids coming up not having those basics and coming to me in middle school, but I really wasn't as familiar with the really early years. So covering pre-K was the start of that. And then as I learned more about pre-K, and a lot of childcare providers in Mississippi were worried about state-funded pre-K kind of siphoning away students from their programs, I got more into covering childcare in Mississippi. And that led to a pretty long project where me and one of my colleagues were looking at quality in Mississippi childcare and what happens to programs when they're really struggling with quality. And we wanted to see, does the state come in and help? Are they kind of left to their own devices without getting more support? I'm sure you can imagine the answer was more of the latter. There's just a huge lack of support and funding for programs. And so, in reporting that project, I was visiting a lot of childcare programs around Mississippi. I saw a lot of really wonderful ones, and then a lot where I was pregnant at this time, and I just couldn't imagine leaving my own child there. And then fast forward when I had my son and was looking for childcare, I found the same thing. There were, where and it made me realize, this is an issue in every community. It's perhaps worse in low income parts of the country, but this child care challenge, no one's really immune to it.
Well, you certainly kind of hit the nail on the head, and it's interesting. I was thinking, like, gosh, you could literally spend a career reporting on early childhood, and maybe not even tell the same story twice. I mean, there's so many different facets and angles to this, and I'm fascinated. I would encourage, we'll post some links here in the show notes, but I would encourage people to read some of the articles that you've done because I mean, we all know these things are kind of boiling under the surface. Um, but the way that you kind of investigate them and couch them and really write about them, it's fascinating. I mean, one of the ones that stuck out to me, of course, was the just the economic pressure we have on our staff, right? And you reported that 2 out of 5 childcare teachers need public assistance due to having low wages. I mean, you think about quality of care and what that looks like. I mean, you got to think that that's going to impact the quality of care of some of these programs. My goodness.
Yes. And sorry, my connection went out for a minute, so I missed the first part of
Oh,
that. But
no worries.
but yes, so there are a lot of early educators that are making really low wages. And as I've been reporting on this, I've just been awakened to, all the ways that this trickles down to quality and to children. And, you have staff leaving for completely different fields because they can make more at Target or Starbucks. I'm sure we've all heard this. And you hear about early educators leaving for pre-K classrooms, like I was talking about in Mississippi. You can make more money there. Um, and also just this stress, if you're not making enough money and you're worried about your own family, right? And having enough food and having enough money for rent or your mortgage, and then you're, taking care of young children, that stress can trickle down. I think it was the researchers at Rapid EC out of Stanford have done a lot of research on this trickle down effect of stress, where if a caregiver is stressed out, that leads to children getting stressed out. And we know as caregivers and parents, when we're stressed out, we're a lot less patient with our children. So there are a lot of implications of this, of low wages. I think also turnover, when you have staff turning over all the time, that really threatens the relationships and connections that children have with their caregivers, and the interactions that children are having with their teachers, which we know is the most important part of childcare, right? Are those relationships and interactions. And I think, just knowing all of this and then reporting on policies in states, there is so much research that when wages go up, staff, you can retain staff, yet that is not the most common policy among states. So, it's kind of stunning to read the research and then report what states are doing and saying, how can you not be raising staff wages when we know that's a key lever to solve this problem?
Well, and this is a field that is so intensive. I mean, we're not making widgets here, right? So it's really all about the relationship. I mean,
Yes.
there's no, it's not like they're not taking anything away for people that do, but look, you work at
Yes.
McDonald's, you're making a hamburger, and that's kind of the widget. This is all about the nurturing, the caring, the changing the diapers, the connection with the
Yes.
kids, like all of that stuff, which is, it's kind of hard to replicate if you don't have that right person there that's fully
Right.
present and committed. And, and you think of all the research that goes into early childhood nowadays. It's, we always kind of cringe when we hear babysitter because that's just, I think it may be the most insulting thing. It's kind of like when you're a
Yeah.
paramedic and they call you the ambulance driver. It's the same kind of
Yeah.
a, but I found it interesting because, you think about the levers that the policymakers have. And one of the things that you've, I think, rightly pointed out, some states are saying, like, well, if we loosen the regulations, that'll decrease the cost. And I'm curious, I know you've done some research on this and written about this, but like the effects of deregulation, like what is that doing from your kind of experience? Like if we deregulate a program, does that really translate to helping this problem, or are we sacrificing quality at that point, or is it kind of somewhere in between here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been tracking about a dozen states that are deregulating. So yeah, increasing staff to child ratios, increasing group sizes, lowering requirements for teachers, and lowering age limits for teachers. So Kansas was even looking at putting 14-year-olds in as childcare teachers.
Wow.
So yeah, and that gets to that babysitter point, right? Like I listened to a lot of legislative sessions in Iowa and Kansas, and you're hearing lawmakers refer to teachers as babysitters, or, well, we have lifeguards, lifeguarding when they're 14 to 16, and, you know, teenagers can wait tables. Why can't they do this? And there's just this huge lack of understanding of the fact that you're not just sitting there making sure a child, can swim and like up on a perch, or bringing people their food, which is complex, but you're taking care of children. You're interacting with them every moment of this time you're with them as their brains are developing faster than at any other point in their life. So it's this really, high stakes, thoughtful, critical work. And a lot of legislators, I think, are missing that aspect in creating this legislation and looking for, okay, the problem is we need to get more kids into spots. So
Yeah.
if we can just fit two more kids in each classroom, we're solving a problem. And that might solve one problem, but to your question, it can create all these others, which researchers pointed out to me. And I read a lot of research on this So there's the whole issue of interactions, right? Staff to child interactions. And I talked to caregivers who said, to the effect when you have that many kids in a classroom, you're just changing diapers. You're trying to keep kids alive. You're not having those really detailed, thoughtful, back and forth, serve and return interactions that develop a kid's brain. I read a lot of inspection reports to see, well, what is quality like in these states deregulating? And there were a lot of teachers getting stressed out, a lot of kids being left alone, unsafe situations, abuse situations, and staff and even the people who are inspecting programs would say this 16-year-old isn't mature enough to be working here. Like, we recommend that they come back when they're more mature, or it's clear that staff are overworked and overwhelmed. So this was all kind of attributed back to the fact that teachers are stressed out, they're underpaid, they're undereducated in, maybe behavior management techniques. There's just, yeah, this whole possibility to lower the quality just to get more kids into programs, which is pretty concerning.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you think about on one side, you've got Kansas with this 14-year-old
Yeah.
proposal. And then where I'm at out in Washington, D.C., we're saying everybody here needs to have at least a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and
Yes.
everything. And I'm thinking, like, none of this makes sense. How can you have 14
Right.
years on one side of the country and then a bachelor's or higher on the other side? Like, we're all facing the workforce challenges. So somebody's
Right.
not talking to each other here, because I don't know if you can't get people to work now, how putting a requirement for, higher level education without an increase in pay. I mean, it doesn't seem like naturally it's going to work, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, it seems like there's, issues with both approaches. And then I think the bigger issue, well, in DC, at least there was the educator supplement, right? But I
true.
know that was up in the air again. But I think the concern here that you're pointing out is this bifurcation, right? As states are kind of diverging. So you might have, this huge inequity where kids in Kansas or Iowa are going to childcare in these overcrowded rooms with undertrained educators. And then, yeah, kids in DC or Vermont or New Mexico, where these states are investing more into their systems, they're getting, we need to see some studies on this, but you would think maybe higher quality care if they're in smaller settings, right? With more highly trained educators who aren't as stressed out, hopefully, because they're making more money. But that's kind of what to watch is this growing inequity that could happen.
So I wanted to shift to parents, if you would allow
Yeah.
me. And
Yes.
one of the best articles I've read in a long time talks and really describes the hunt for quality childcare, and maybe even not even quality child, just the hunt for childcare alone as being
Yes.
almost like this Hunger Games adventure, with stories of before the baby's in the womb and not even 5 months in the womb, and we're already applying for childcare and getting on waiting lists, and parents tackling each other to the floor. I mean, just all sorts of craziness, right? So, um, what does that kind of look like? This hyper competitive environment. What are you seeing out there from parents? Again, lack of understanding, I'm sure, for many first time parents about what early childhood even is, what a quality program is, why this is important to my kid, versus just like, I need a slot and I don't care where it is and I'll take it
Right.
because I got to work. And
Right.
unfortunately, that's the discussion that's being happened at some tables out there, right?
Right. Yes, definitely. A lot of desperation where it's, this is what I can get. So I'm doing it even if I feel uneasy at work while I'm away, which I understand that. That's something I experienced with my oldest. And if you need to work, then you put up with it and, do what you have to until you can't do it anymore. But this Hunger Games, so I talked to a lot of parents reporting this article, and there were so many similar stories of, you have to know to get on multiple wait lists, which not every parent does. And you
Right.
have to know to, do you kind of figure out, do you do it close to your house? Do you do one close to your work? Do you kind of, play this game of, oh, maybe this community won't have as many kids, so I'll, add my kid to that wait list. And then there's the calling to follow up. There's this kind of like secret knowledge among, especially I would say veteran parents, that sometimes if you just happen to call, I heard this from so many parents, if you just happen to call and check in on your spot on the wait list, you might get off that wait list, even if you're not the next person, because you happen to get right the right person at the child care program, right as someone is leaving or just pulled their kid out, and you just lucked out, right? You have to know that you're going to have to put money down. It's just this game, right? And I mean, I've talked to parents who there's one program here where I live where you have to go line up to submit your application. So parents go line up the night before. And this is similar for summer camps too, or the programs where you have to submit your application before you even tour the program. So, and that's money put down too. So it's just this, crazy game. And coupled with the fact that like it's often hard to really know much about these programs. You can look at inspection reports, but that's a snapshot. You can talk to other parents, but everyone has their own experiences.
Right.
It can be hard to know what to look for. And then, like what you said before, if you need it, you might just say, all right, it seems okay. Let's just put my kid here. So, yeah, it's just maddening. It's just impossible to kind of navigate this. And a lot of it's up to luck and money if you have the money to apply to a lot of programs.
Well, I mean, I remember even, I guess it was, I don't know, a year or 2 years old, I guess, just trying to find somewhere over the summer. And,
Yes.
it was a big push, quite honestly, to get the oldest child potty trained, because so many programs are like,
Yes.
you got to be potty trained. And like, okay, well, guess what? By the time you're two, you're going to be potty trained because you need to go somewhere. And
Yes.
yeah, it was interesting. I enjoyed the Hunger Games analogy and all of that.
Thank you.
Thought it was pretty
It's
clever.
sad but true. Yes.
Well, and every parent's been there, right? I mean, every
Yeah.
parent has literally been there thinking about it, and the ones that are always kind of caught off guard are the ones that just you don't know what you don't know, and you just feel like, oh,
Yeah.
I drive around town, I see, this location, that location, this Andy's daycare on this corner, at a Kitty Academy or a Bright Horizons on this
Exactly.
corner. Like, there's plenty of spots, and you have no idea until you need
Right.
it, like how competitive it really is. I wanted to
Exactly.
to ask you because I know you've also been doing studies in like Norway and some other countries.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in other countries, that you're not seeing here, and kind of vice versa? Because it seems like maybe this is another area where another country has this. Now, again, Norway's not the size of the United States, but seems like they've got this figured out a little bit better than we do.
Yeah, I was blown away by Norway, and it wasn't what I expected. When I started looking into Norway, I was looking for a country that subsidizes childcare. I wanted to see what does it look like when the system is subsidized, so you don't have programs worrying about their bottom line and about
Okay.
operational costs. And what does it look like when parents have help paying for childcare, both of which are true in Norway. But the more I looked into Norway, I was really blown away by their whole approach to childcare and childhood, which is children have the right to a good childhood, and childcare is supposed to support that. And they have even a law. It's called the kindergarten law because kindergarten is what they call childcare there.
Okay.
So it's not like our kindergarten. It's, our version of childcare. And everything was child focused. And it was just this, fascinating experience where things like programs are created around what is best for children and what they think children should have in childhood. So a ton of time outside, really small ratios. It was like 1 to 3 or 1 to 6. And these are ratio, even for older children, where in the United States you might see, 1 to 12 or one to
Right.
16. Lots of, I would say, like risky play, which there are benefits to that. I was, touring all these kindergartens, and children would zoom down hills on little bikes, or they'd be climbing trees. And I was like, are they okay? Are they, no one's batting an eye. And I was clearly the anxious American, just so worried about what might happen to these kids. And all the providers were like, this is how they learn, and they're learning their bodies and they're experiencing the outdoors. So I think that just like uniform approach to what's best for children was really powerful. I would say there are also aspects I think we could learn from. Like there was I hear with American parents, I want a more academic program or I want a more play-based program, right? Which I think acknowledges the fact that we do see quite a few early learning programs more focused on academics. And we know kids learn through play and they can learn academic concepts through play. And in Norway, I asked, when do you teach letters? And this one educator was like, oh, we don't teach that. They learn that when they're 7 and they go to elementary school. We don't teach that here unless they're interested in it. If they want to learn letters, we'll teach them. They learn how to write their name or the letters in their name. But they don't sit down and do the alphabet or the phonics like we do here.
Hmm.
So I thought that was a really interesting they want to preserve childhood so much. They are very protective of what they are teaching children and what they're kind of holding space for in their programs.
Wow, that's really interesting. So talking to kind of the boots on the ground, the teachers, the educators, did you kind of get a sense of like job satisfaction in Norway versus the US? Could you kind of extrapolate into that a little bit or not really?
Yeah, so there was still some of the stereotypes that you see here, right? Where in Norway, instead of babysitters, they were referred to as aunties for a long time, like
Mm.
kind of this like more informal, like you're the, child minder, the auntie, and not as much an educator. But they said that has been changing slowly as early ed has become a formal part of Norway's education system over the past few years. So that is changing. Early educators were saying they love that they get to be outside all the time. There were a lot more male teachers, and that was really notable. At every program I went to, there was at least one male teacher, and
Hmm.
I that is so rare here. I
Yeah,
visited
so
hundreds
rare.
of programs here, right? And I talked to some of the men and said, like, what drew you to early ed? Because this isn't as common in America. And they said, I get to play outside all the time, like with kids. This is the best job. So, if you don't like being outside, then you might not like that approach. But a lot of educators were saying, this is the best job. I get to spend, I mean, kids are outside all the time, no matter the weather. And a lot of these educators love that. They get to be outside playing and learning and hiking and taking kids rock climbing and teaching them to use knives when they're 4 and 5 and
Wow.
just yes, these really neat activities. So yeah, I mean, the educators I spoke to were happy and they are paid well. I mean, I'm sure there are, people who are not, so I can't speak for every early educator. They are paid more than the equivalent in America. They get about on par with someone was saying like police officers and other kind of service workers. So they're seen as, a public service and a public good. They could still stand to get more pay. It's not equal with other educators, but it is viewed higher than America. You can say that.
Well, it's really interesting that the perspective of kind of, examining the other cultures, seeing what they're doing, seeing what's subsidized, what's not subsidized. And I know, it's one of the things that I really think in 60 years this year for a Head Start. And it's still one of the things we struggle with here in the United States, despite childcare being a massive issue in literally every every district in the country, every congressional district. People need
Yeah.
childcare to go to work. That's what the economy needs. And I'm just kind of wondering, from your journalist background, you've obviously got all these great storytelling skills, but is there more that we should be doing here in the United States to really advocate for the increased funding? Because it does seem like, and look, I worked in the Senate, like every single group that comes in, it's money, 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 money. Like I get it,
Right.
like, but in this case, like money really would help in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. There's obviously other things we can do too, but this is truly a case, as you mentioned before, about recruitment and retention and maintaining quality. Sadly, all that costs money. Um,
Right.
and I'm just wondering, like, kind of all your experiences, all your stories that you've written, the research that you've done, the people you've talked to. Is there something that you find really resonates and we could use for, policymakers saying like, this is why this is important, or this is beyond babysitting, or this is what's literally
Right.
keeping your communities running. And if this goes
Right.
away, we're in trouble here, right?
Yeah. And I've asked a lot of experts this question, like what makes people care? Because there's still the issue that many people view this as kind of a threat to families. And That was not the case in Norway when I suggested that. People were horrified. Like,
Oh,
no,
wow.
that's
Okay.
not an issue here. They view if you don't send your kid to these kindergartens by, toddler or early preschool, you're taking an experience from them. Like you
Mm,
are not giving them the opportunity to kind of, explore, have this amazing childhood experience with friends and meet other adults and children. And I think that we don't really have that perspective here. We don't really view, childcare and preschool as look at all the things you can do, right? And the
yeah.
experiences you could get and how this could kind of enrich your life as a child. But I also think, we tend to kind of push the economic argument to your point. I think a lot of experts said money is kind of, pointing out the economics and the lost workforce and not having childcare, how bad that is for the economy. I personally think a really important argument is this idea of brain development and how, children are being hurt by not investing more in childcare and by kind of being okay with the status quo of a lot of childcare programs that children go to that are underfunded and don't have the resources or staffing for these high quality experiences. Um, and you think about, these kids, will go to these childcare programs and then go into elementary school. And that's when we kind of address what could have been addressed earlier. So we're kind of creating problems and then paying for it later. And I don't think that gets as much attention of, these are children's brains. These are our future, doctors and teachers and, everyone we need for society. And this is basically funding like the good of our future society. But I mean, that's me personally. And I've had experts say, like, yeah, that's all nice, but like, that's not going to convince people. So, which is sad, right? It's sad in America that, we proclaim to care about kids and like that should move us to hear and see the situation kids are in and think, well, the answer is kids should be home with their parents, or that's a private, issue when like this does involve everyone in America. So that's just something I think is really important to point out, but it's very hard to do and to get people to care more.
Well, and there's certainly like funding streams for it here in America. It's just that the way we've kind of artificially fragmented our system between what we would call private childcare and then,
Yes.
religious-based childcare, maybe exempt childcare. Of course, we got a kind of a subset of family childcare somewhere in that bowl as well. And then we've got Head Start programs, we've got military child. I mean, we have a lot of programs, a lot of people doing this, but it doesn't seem like it's cohesive as it should be. Because at the end of the day, like, look, I don't care if the 1 year old is in a family child care home, a religious based, and a center based, and a
Yeah.
for profit, a nonprofit, a military, a Head Start. I just really want the child to get the best they possibly can. And
Right.
I guess it saddens you a little bit to think that we play politics to some degree about, funding sources, what's available, what's not, and kind of how we couch it. And the income levels, again, artificial. Like if you happen to make an extra $2,000, then you're not eligible for some of the support or some of the programs. It seems that's a little harsh sometimes too for these kids, right? Um,
Yeah, I just wrote a story about a mom in New York who was making 35,000 a year and she left her an abusive relationship and she had a bachelor's degree. She was working in a public service job, 35,000 a year, was turned down for childcare assistance for her son because she made $98 a month too much. And
oh,
so, in order to get assistance, she had to quit her job to get on public assistance, which would then automatically qualify her for childcare. So, yeah, it's just this, yeah, really tough system with all these rules. And I would say, going back to the different types of childcare, something else that drew me to Norway was the state, or sorry, the country funds all different kinds of childcare. So they are funding the home-based programs, the private programs, the public programs. So parents still have that choice, which is so important here in America as well. It's just that underlying kind of operational funding is being taken care of so that it doesn't get passed on to parents.
I really appreciated the different techniques you described, like the play, and just
Yeah.
how important the play is. And I know you've talked a little bit about this with Norway. But I'm curious, as you're kind of, looking at programs throughout the United States, do you feel like we're doing as much play as we should be, or do you feel like there's some opportunities there to increase the play time that we have in our programs?
I feel like there's opportunities. I think the biggest difference I've noticed, like outdoor space, is really lacking for a lot of childcare programs. And I visit some, and just the space they have to go outdoors is sad. And it's not what children deserve, but it's all they either can afford or they have zoning for, especially in big cities, right? If you
Yeah.
don't have access to a lot of green space. That was one of the big differences with Norway. Of course, it's a very different setting and very different country. Um, but just the access to the different outdoor play spaces is just very lacking and different in America. Um, I see a lot of children playing. I think, yeah, I think it just varies so much here. Like I've been in several childcare programs where I'm there for an hour and it's very academically heavy. And then others where I'm there for an hour and you would think children are just kind of running around in chaos, but we know that that's how they're learning, right? So I just think, it varies so much here. I think it comes down the area where I can really kind of come up with a conclusion is that outdoor space just we need more of it for kids to have that meaningful outdoor playtime.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, I've seen it, you go to New York, you go to Los Angeles, you go to San Francisco. I mean, it's big cities. It's hard to find that
Yeah,
green space. And I guess the challenge is there, and as an educator, what are the techniques or what are the ways you can maybe bring some of that that green space into your classroom? Like,
right.
I don't know, like I was at one program and it was autumn and they brought in like a whole bushel basket of leaves from outside. I mean, that was
Yes.
cool, right? Like, um,
Yes.
they're doing what they can, but yeah, it's challenging when you don't have access to it. Or you see it sometimes where these programs they have no choice, but they have to share like a public park with
Yes.
the whole
Yes.
world. And some of these public parks, they're not exactly the cleanest or the safest, or
Right.
you don't look, nobody's getting background checked to go to a public park. You don't really know who's around, so that can be a little
Right.
challenging too. But you make the best of what you have, I suppose. But that's a good point for sure. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate all your insights. I appreciate everything you're doing. Keep writing about early childhood, please.
Thank you.
That's,
Thank you so much
we
for the
need
work
more
you're doing
voices out
too.
there. Any insights in some of the next topics you're working on or things you're going to dive into?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I'm working, speaking of kind of facilities and space, I'm working on a story right now about districts investing more in facilities just for young kids for pre-K. So
Oh, wow.
I visited a really neat program in Houston it was like a well, 24 mini children's museums in this early learning center. It was really neat. So I'm excited for that. I'm doing some work more on the older side of early ed, looking at inclusion practices in elementary, and continuing to write about family childcare experiences, different childcare programs following policy here. So yes, any listeners, feel free to reach out to me with story ideas and to share your experiences because I love writing about this.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you for all you do, and thank you for being here. It's very interesting to talk to you and hear your perspective. It's honestly, I can't say enough. Like, we'll put the links in the show notes. Please read these articles. Like, they are.
Thank you.
I feel like you're a square, a fair shooter, whatever the term is, a square shooter. Like,
Thank
you're
you.
not picking sides. You're being very, objective and very just honest about the whole thing, because
Thank you.
it's not a perfect system, but we need to talk about it in order to fix it and to raise awareness on it. So thank you for all you do. And of course, thank everybody for listening. Please check out Jackie and all her wonderful articles. They're linked below. And we hope to see you next time. So for Andy Roszak here on the Early Childhood Chats podcast, I'll say thank you for joining us. And we will see you on the next podcast. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much. That was so